就是在腹，属于热，所以说这个就是要把这个表里阴阳这些寒热虚实，从脉象当中我们应该看得出。
Yeah, these are of course the things that you've most likely learned about in your diagnosis class. Is the way how you distinguish the yin yang is the pulses at the surface. That's a yang problem, that's more on the outside. You need to go all the way in to find it. That's a yin problem on the inside. If it's primarily there in the middle position, as you have with the Xiao Chai Hu Tang pulse, then that would be a ban biao ban li, with half on the outside, half on the inside. And of course, if the pulse is faster, that tends to be more of a yang pulse. But as we've seen from this example, there are various reasons why the pulse is in that yang state. It doesn't necessarily mean it's purely excess heat. Slower pulses usually expressing cold, deeper pulses expressing cold and deficiency, etc.
比如说脉很缩，缩大又无力，缩紧应该是热，大也应该热。它有一压的话，中区、承区都没有力。这种就是属于阳中负阴，就是里头夹杂气，阳中负阴。这个像李中堂啊，这个。
黄气兼中汤。
这个就是像李中堂、建中堂这类，他们否大，否缩，有力，好像是阳症，但按下这有没有力，这就是虚症，这是阳中带阴，所以就讲。
The problem is that in a lot of the patients you see, it's not black and white. Okay, so like that is one of the problems of the modern TCM. That the minute you feel a fast pulse, you start clearing heat. When a lot of the fast pulses you see, they're weak. Okay. So the fastness is reflective of a certain kind of heat, but if you push down on that pulse and doesn't give you any resistance and has sort of a floating, deficient kind of quality to that, you need to heat that. You know, if the pulse gives you more and more resistance and is flooding your fingers as you go down and fast on top of it, then you can go ahead and clear that heat as an excess type of heat. But he says for the fast pulses that are floating and deficient, you want to use either the Li Zhong Tang type of approach, Tai-yin approach to solidify the center, or the Jian Zhong Tang, the build the center type of approach, like Huang Qi Jian Zhong Tang that he gave us earlier with the stragglers added.
另外，这个 否、说、有理，它有否，有说，这都阳正，又有理，这个就是顺阳之正，就是完全是阳正。这种的话就要这个就像大热、大汗出、大烦渴这类的问题，他有这个没，他就有这就是白虎汤这类的，叫一阴助阳。
So the next type of pulse would be a fast pulse, a rapid pulse that is floating but is strong. Strong is always you push down on it, it feels more wiry and gives you resistance. Then that would be a real excess pulse where you need to clear the heat in the Yangming channels. So any kind of Yangming, representative formula is of course Baihutang, where you have those typical symptoms that go with it, big thirst, big sweat, big pulse and big thirst. But then there's a whole, basically the use of Coptis and Da Huang and all of those things, that those all are more internal type of Yangming approaches. You can consider that.
这脉很紧，有否，有紧有力，这就是寒邪在表。假如这种的话就应该发表，假如没有寒，这就是麻黄汤。
So when you have a floating pulse that is rapid, and this is important, the floating pulse that is rapid and is then tight, okay, that he calls jin, the tight pulse feels sort of like a wiry pulse, but right at the surface, that usually goes with either pain or goes with that the surface is congested and is a sign for you when you feel a rapid floating and tight pulse that you can fabiao, you can resolve the surface with diaphoretics. So of course if the person has a fever and is not sweating, has a stronger type of constitution, you would use the Ma Huang Tang, like use ephedra to release the surface.
这脉很沉，沉就在里，而且很有力，这就是阴中扶阳，就应该攻下，就是三承气汤这类。
When somebody has a pulse that is very deep, but then in the deep yin position is very strong, which is a yang feature, meaning you have a yang situation and the yin situation together, then that is a pulse where the purging method would be appropriate. So using the second part of the Yangming method, where Bai Hutang more for a Yangming surface syndrome, here is more of a Yangming internal syndrome, where you would use the Chengqi Tang approach to purge all of them containing Da Huang.
另外就是那个沉是有力，没沉有细又没有力，这就是纯阴之人。
Whereas the pure yin pulse would be deep and then be weak at the same time, or very fine. Xi is like, it feels like a silken thread where you can barely detect that. And so that's internal cold and deficiency.
他有这类的脉就是他就可能有丹阳脉啊、下利清补啊、四肢缺液啊，这个就应该给他加温。四叶杯就是所谓四叶杯，就是四叶汤、理中汤、 或者李中堂这都可以用。
真无汤，
这都可以。
So those kind of patients, they usually have cold extremities, weak extremities, Shaoyin symptoms of the sort where they want to sleep all the time, they feel fatigued all the time. Also from a Western perspective, that often I'm adding that to have sort of a endocrine exhaustion components with that, like thyroid, low adrenal, that sort of thing. For that, you need to use 四逆背, meaning the aconite type of formulas, like starting with 四逆汤, just the 3 herbs, aconite, ginger, licorice, or 附子理中汤, or 真无汤, those kinds of things.
没想大致就这样。我刚才说了，叫没沉又有理，很滑索，这些就是没有人应该用三黄汤这类来清理。就刚才已经就讲了。另外一块就是我们这个一般来说是这个伤寒啊，你脉象都在左边，脉象都在左边，左手的脉来摸得很紧，很有力。这个手有和平，这就是外感，就是有太阳病，有力。这个手和平，这边就是看五脏，所以看
包括归子汤都是这样的脉
啊，都是。凡是伤寒的脉都表现这边。
So this is, I mean, I've been studying with Dr. Zeng for 20 years. I studied with him in the traditional way where we would, part of it is storytelling, part of it is just whatever patient comes, we'll encounter that. This is something he's done only recently, and you benefit from that, and I benefit from that this is sort of a very systematic introduction to pulses. Some of it feels very simple and basic, but that is the actuality how he practices. So he says the Shanghan pulses, okay, people who basically from our perspective have a wind invasion, have a common cold, whether the patient knows about that or not, the pulses usually is floating. Remember, it's called a floating pulse, but it's particularly floating and tight on the left side. Okay, so that includes the ephedra pulses, but also just the cinnamon pulses. And the right side is almost normal. So he says that, yeah.
这边就代表是伤寒的脉。假如是这边的手，右手脉得很紧，这个左手的这个脉啊和平，不紧不浮，这就是内伤饮食，你这里面。
If you have the opposite situation where the pulse on the right-hand side is floating and tight, specifically avoiding the term wiry here, because when you say wiry, immediately means a liver qi stagnation. Okay, so it's floating and tight, and the left side is normal. That would be an indication for food stagnation, or that there's some acute something going on in the digestive tract, including things like food poisoning or so. The typical pulses like that.
因此，这个是看表症，这边看里症，所以这个脏腑里头的问题，所以这边脉紧就是，内伤饮食。
So the left side is more for the surface syndromes, whereas on the right-hand side, the floating is more of an indication of what's going on in your intestines and your stomach, which means that's an internal problem, even though you've got the floating pulse there on the right side.
那么这边的脉否紧，这边脉也否紧，那就是假实伤寒，你内头也有问题，外头也有问题，也叫假实伤寒。
If you've got a situation where both pulses are floating and tight, that means you've got a common cold wind invasion type of Shanghan, cold disorder, cold invasion going on, plus some influence on your gastrointestinal tract, which of course happens quite a bit. So you've got a surface problem that's already impacted your digestion.
那么左手脉呢有紧，这边脉呢空大无力，摸得很大，但是按着有无力。这种情况呢，就是劳力伤寒，你内里的伤了，这个有标准。
就是等于是一种痨病，是不是？
劳力伤寒就是虚啊，我这里头空大的嘛。
So if you've got a floating and tight pulse on the left side, and then a floating pulse on the right side that is big but feels hollow, okay? Meaning it meets your fingers like it's flooding up to your fingers and feels like it has a bigger volume, almost like a chive type of thing. But when you push down on it, that chive collapses somehow easily. It means you've got a Shanghan situation that has exhausted. You have a Lao type of syndrome, which is a wasting syndrome in a certain way. This is when I'm adding that, there are certain chronic viral syndromes, like I forget whether it's Epstein-Barr or Lyme disease or so, theoretically would belong to that category where you're basically wasting away, but you've got this wind syndrome that you still need to be addressing.
左手脉呢紧，右手脉红滑，一些滑就是痰那种，有痰那种脉象。这种脉象呢，在一般就身热恶寒啊，头痛啊、咳嗽啊、烦闷啊，胸胁这个体痛啊，这就假痰伤寒。
对，有没有什么特殊的方，还是就？
这痰的伤寒嘛，方嘛你这个就是他那边，你就根据这边脉，你标准你轻重，给个麻黄汤有寒无寒，麻黄汤啊、葛根汤啊这类的。
对。
然后加他就或者胸闷啊，去加你加化痰的瓜蒌啊这些嘛，所以这个就是根据它具体的。
So the of course when you have a wind, you gotta resolve the wind, so that this is like what I asked him just now, what kind of formulas. He says you use your regular repertoire of wind formulas. So 桂枝汤, 桂枝加葛根汤, ma huang tang, those kinds of things for the situation on the left, for the Shanghan. But then you address that based on the problems on the right, you need to add different things to that. I would think that, for instance, the Gui Zhi Jia Long Gu Mu Li Tang would be a good, for that Lao situation, would be a good modification. He says if you've got the tightness, a floating and tight pulse on the left, but you have a big and slippery pulse, meaning not an empty pulse, but a pulse that gives you resistance, then it means you've got phlegm. Okay, so you've got a wind cold in your meridian systems that is complicated with on the inside trapped phlegm. So these kinds of people, they're usually coughing and having all kinds of, sometimes also mental symptoms as the phlegm is clogging up the orifice to the heart, as the Chinese say, etc.
左手眉来紧，右手眉来沉。一般就是身热恶寒啊，头痛身痛啊，胸满胁胀啊，气饿不舒啊，为假气伤寒。右手的眉很沉，左手眉来
对，
紧。
我知道。
哦，那个就
假气伤寒。
假气哦。
什么意思？我没有完全懂那个假气伤寒。
假气伤寒就是说，这里头的话，气饿不舒嘛，它里头。
Okay. 好。If you've got a pulse, that's very, and once again, I should say this is sort of the mechanics of the pulse is just, you remember that the doctor in ancient times is called the gong, which is the same word for a carpenter, same word for a craftsperson. So this is sort of the mechanics of this craft that, for your whole life you follow somebody, you feel these things, it's organically woven into the learning process. And you as students, you always go like, just give me the damn pulse, But then when it just comes one after another, there's something in you that goes like, oh, they all sound the same. There's some kind, I just get dizzy from that sort of thing. But I, once again, want to emphasize, this is sort of like, you've got a download of a lifetime of observation, in like, he wrote up a 2-page thing, just for you, so you can have the basic way of looking at the pulse. So he says if it's floating and tight on the left side and is deep on the right side, that is a common cold or something where the surface is involved with qi stagnation on the inside. So these people, they usually have symptoms of qi stagnation, like they feel like the chest is stuffy, or they feel depressed, or there's some kind of bloating going on, etc.
另外就是左手眉来紧，但是还带舌，舌就不流利；右手眉沉，而且缩。一般来说呢，就是身热恶寒哦，头痛哦，烦渴哦，两胁、小腹啊里头痛，这就是血瘀伤寒，这里头就有淤血在里头。
There is further complication if you've got the pulse on the left is floating and tight, but you've got a so-called choppy pulse, or it's this stagnant type of pulse that feels, as the ancient books say, like a knife that cuts bamboo, which is, if you try to do that, you feel like you're constantly stuck. And my own sensation of that is while it's not technically irregular, the pulse, it's almost like you keep waiting for the pulse. You feel like it's not a very rhythmic, predictable pulse, but you waiting for that pulse as it's grinding itself through there. Sometimes also choppy pulses can be that you don't feel a pulse at all because everything is so stagnant that you can't feel it, or you feel it on one side, not on the other. That is usually then you need to resolve the surface and address the stagnating blood. And people usually have stagnating blood symptoms like fixed pain in certain locations, etc.
另外就是左右手两边的眉都非常沉，左右手眉的又沉又细，或者沉浮摸不到的，但是面色又这个面色不滑青，手脚冷，小肚子绞痛，这些症状，或者有时候觉得吐力啊、舌卷冷缩啊，这里的话都是假阴重寒。
阴重寒。
就是阴气比较盛，就是就对少阴症来说。
Yeah. So pulses, of course, if they're deep on both sides, and that's a very common pulse. Like in ancient times, these kind of Shaoyin diseases and Juyin diseases, they are usually like in life-threatening situations. Nowadays, this is part of the so-called burnout syndrome, that you've got even younger people because they running on energy that they don't have. You find like that exhaustion is that there's nothing in the battery, and you need to go all the way down to feel the pulse. So there is usually, that goes with cold hands and feet. The face color is either pale or going into the grayish, greenish, etc. So that's the deficiency and a cold. Cold that is deep inside of the body. What a cold means your young energy, your healing energy, your self-replicating energy on a cellular level is impeded. It's frozen as if it's constant winter time in your body. And there you need to warm once again. That those are the aconite pulses, or anything that has to do with the term suni, the four cold extremities, which includes, of course, like very often when you feel that pulse, you use it. If it's not aconite, it'll be dangui suni tang also. Using the combination of dangui and cinnamon.
这个凡是没答说否懂话，这是阳美。
你把这个动脉再跟那个大华的区别再讲一下。
好，这个答就是
对，大是
这个体会得到吗？
对。
话就是说呢，很流利，
对，
流利，就像那个钢珠一方面，那叫话。懂美它有点像话美，但是它也很有力，它不是那么流利，那个叫懂美。但是不好分，就是它那个类型是一样的，但是它就是快慢不一样，懂跟说那个不一样，说就是快，那个就不快。
So pulses that are big and slippery, those are yang pulses. And he adds, once again, slippery is different from the wiry pulse. You feel that in one position that stands out, or you feel the pulse in all three positions, but you don't feel it like a tight wire where there's no differentiation of positions, but where the positions beat independently. You feel, and it's like the pulse is rolling underneath your finger, okay? And the reason why it's called slippery is because it's like a pearl that slips away underneath your finger. It rolls underneath your finger. Whereas there is another pulse that I hear him talk about quite a bit, that's called the dongmai, that I just asked him to differentiate from the huamai. The dongmai, the moving pulse, is just like the slippery pulse, but it doesn't slip away underneath your finger. It's more like a vibration that comes into your finger but doesn't roll away from it. But the meaning is similar. All of these are yang pulses, yang excess pulses where you can clear heat or phlegm heat.
另外就是沉、色、弱、眩、微，这就是阴美。沉就是很沉，色就是不流利，给它画那个是反的，不流利。弱是摸到好像有，又好像没有，这美很弱的。给这个眩美，这个微美微也是，这些都是阴美。
So pulses that are called deep or stagnant or weak or feeble, they all describe, of course, cold and deficiency. And the weak and the feeble is, of course, One minute you think you feel the pulse, and then again you don't, and you need to change your pressure in order to see it.
所以把这个阴阳一分清楚，哪些脉是阴脉，哪些脉。所以你遇到那个阴病，得阴病那个少阴病啊、厥阴病啊的，阴病见阳脉则生，阳病就是感冒这一类的，见到阴脉就要死。
So in ancient times, what was very important for a physician to make your livelihood, it was sort of like you hang out a shingle, you're in a business where you're a craftsperson, but everything is hinging upon your reputation. So just as important, we talked about that before, as healing somebody was to recognize when no matter what you do, that person's going to die. Because the minute you prescribe something, even though that's not your fault, the family members will point the finger at you, and drive you out of the village, so that's something you want. So ancient times, you very often had these books. This is how you heal somebody. This is how you recognize somebody. Is another book, just as important. This is how you recognize whether somebody's going to make it or not. And those people you shouldn't be treating, because otherwise it's not going to help the patient and you're going to get yourself in trouble. So he says the situation where you have a yin disease, but you see a young pulse, they all cold and deficient, but then the pulses are fast or floating or something, never be afraid of that, they'll live. Whereas the opposite, if you have somebody with a young disease and symptoms, but they have yin pulses, that's always a bad sign. That's usually a person that's not going to make it.
因为就寸口脉弱，没有力，上不。
If the pulse is weak in the first position, in the Cun
切
position,
忌发吐，切忌给他用吐的方法。吃脉分，
切记是不要
千
万不要去。
我去不能给他吐。
In ancient times, what a shamanic healers very often would do in the villages was, oh, you've got some kind of demon in your body or something is, let's purge it out, let's sweat it out, let's vomit it out, okay? So just like there's lots of admonishment in the Shanghan Nun to not use purging method because it drains your righteous qi, you also don't want to, which is not so much of a problem nowadays, is to use emetics to clear the patient at the top. Particularly if the pulses are slippery in the first positions, that's something where you should never use a vomiting method.
吃脉弱，切忌发寒。
When the kidney positions, the third position in the pulse is weak, you should always be careful, or that's the taboo, you shouldn't use diaphoretics. Okay?
发寒或者有泻下都不行。
And purging method are also not possible, using Da Huang. I remember when I studied with Dr. Peng, who's an old master of the fire spirit school, he would diagnose tightness in the bladder position on the left-hand side. You go deep, that pulse is tight, he would say you can use, tight is of course very palpable, you can use diaphoretics. That person has a common cold. So Dr. Zeng is saying if that pulse is feeble, don't purge, don't sweat.
阳症就是你有感冒这些，脉大变得脉小，就是病在退。
Oh.
脉大这病进，脉小它就病退。这指阳症就是外感这些，你脉越大就说病在进，它变小了就脉在退。
对。 病在退, so
病在退.
Yeah. So when the pulses, the bigger pulses always means the disease is progressing. Whereas when the pulses are smaller, it always means the disease is going away, particularly in an acute situation.
我假如是阴症，脉沉浮就病进，迟缓为病退。 那阴症它脉就很沉、很细、很浮、沉浮，所以说它的慢慢它不沉不浮，它迟缓就病得退。
To make it more understandable, the what I just said is for young diseases, when the pulses are big, the disease is advancing still, whereas if the pulses are smaller, that means the acute phase is starting to be over. For a yin disease, a cold and deficiency disease, if the pulses are deep, 沉浮冰静哈。
你阴病嘛，你
Yeah.
阴病你脉就本来就是你再沉再浮就病尽了，你本来阴病，假如它脉上来了，迟缓这些就病退了。
Okay. Yeah. So if the disease is the pulses are at the very bottom, means the disease is getting worse. The chronic cold situation is becoming more and more entrenched, whereas of course that's what you want to see with your acupuncture treatment right away, or your moxa treatment, or with herbs over time, is that pulse gradually comes up. That means that disease is getting better.